It's my pleasure. I get to introduce Faith Van Hut. She tends the land, plants, animals, and people of Midnight's farm. The intensive no-till market garden is her special place where she can experiment with practices to build soil health and grow food for the community. Faith also serves as the coordinator for the Agricultural Resource Committee of San Juan County, advocating for farmers, farmland protection, and a thriving local food system. Today, Faith is going to talk about cover crops uncovered, soil health, biodiversity, and weed suppression. Cover crops can help improve soil health, suppress weeds, and attract beneficial insects. In this talk, you'll discover how to select the right cover crops for your garden, learn practical tips for planting and managing them, and understand the long-term benefits they bring to your soil and garden ecosystem. Here we go.
Thank you. Oh, that comes on. Hello. 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 Or do I take that one? Hello. Ooh. Okay. Well, thank you so much for asking me back. I'm so thrilled to be here. So I had so much fun last year and I had so much fun putting this together. So I just want to thank you. And we're going to be talking about cover crops. And how many of you out here have played around with cover crops in the past? Cool. How many of you have had like successes? How many of you have had challenges? Yes, how many of you have had both? My hands up there. So, oops. What's going on? Okay, there we go. So I have Midnight's Farm and we do a bunch of different things, including a no-till market garden. And I do this with my husband, David, who makes a lot of compost, which is really helpful when one plays around with the market garden. And also have a bunch of other lovely, amazing people who help us on the farm, who 3 of them might like sneak in the back door at some point. So if you see 3 people coming in, that will be Claire, Liz, and Andrew. They are delivering veggies first, so they might be late. So what we're going to cover today is kind of cover crops, the what and the why, and how to select them, and some different strategies for selecting them, planting, and terminating. And then we'll go over some resources. And I will share all these slides. So there are some, especially on the resource page, some links and stuff. So you can get them. Sure, somebody can send them out to everybody. So why do we do this? So I think a healthy soil is the foundation to both having an abundant yield, having all those vegetables and flowers and fruits that we want to eat, and also to the healthy soil is the basis for a thriving ecosystem. And I think of the garden as an ecosystem. It's not just the plants that we grow. Hey guys. It's also all of the plants and animals and bacteria and fungi and protozoa who are what make healthy soil. So that's what we're going for. And there's some strategies to do that. So this is right out of, I'm sure you've heard that regenerative agriculture and this whole like movement. And these are some strategies that you'll hear when people talk about regenerative agriculture. It's also, what's cool is these are strategies that whether you're working with one raised bed or thousands of acres, you can use these same strategies and they're going to help with getting to our goal of having healthy soil in this kind of diverse ecosystem and hopefully also good yields. So the strategies: keeping living plants in the soil as much as possible, growing as many species of plants as is practical, and disturbing the soil as little as possible and keeping the soil covered. So you'll hear, you know, if you geek out about regenerative agriculture, you'll kind of come across this said in different ways in different places. And so gonna just take a quick little tour through like, why are these strategies what they are? And it comes really down to understanding like, okay, plants' role in soil is, you know, we're gonna start with photosynthesis, right? Because it's like sunlight. I know I did this last year, but I think it's just really important to like have these concepts in our head when we're gardening. It's like the plants are photosynthesizing, they're taking the light from the sun and carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and they are bumping off that oxygen so we can all breathe. And then with the carbon, they're making sugars, they're making carbohydrates. And they use some of that to make their bodies, but the rest of it, they are sending down into their roots and making root exudates, which is basically they're pumping sugars out of their roots, and they're doing that for a specific reason. They're in collaboration with a whole host of organisms in, they call it the rhizosphere, this little ecosystem that's around the roots of plants. So down there, there are bacteria, there are fungi, there are different protozoa that are in relationship with the plants. And the exchanges, the plants are like, here, have a cookie. And the bacteria is like, cool, here, have some calcium. So the plants are getting all these different nutrients from this relationship that they have with the microbiology that's in the soil around their roots. So I just want to like have this, like, keep this all in your mind as we, oh, but it's not just like teeny weeny, right? We've got the teeny weeny bacteria, but healthy soil, right? It's an ecosystem. There's this whole soil food web. So it goes from the microscopic up to, you know, earthworms, and then the bigger arthropods, the ones that shred up the dead plant matter, up to the birds that are eating and the different beneficial insects. So just thinking, okay, your garden is more than your plants. Your garden is the soil, but it's more than the soil. It's all of the life that's in the soil and the life that is kind of flowing through the garden and creating this ecosystem. So with that in mind, cover crops. Cover crops are a great strategy to support this whole system. And so what is a cover crop? It's basically a crop that we plant that we're planting it to support the soil, to benefit the soil rather than to, you know, just eat. Like, I mean, our other crops also can benefit the soil, but we're planting our carrot because we want to eat the carrot. We're planting the clover because we want the soil to eat. So that's really the main difference with a cover crop. And there are some cover crops that you can eat as well. So there's a whole bunch of different benefits to that cover crops can bring when we bring them into our garden system. They can suppress weeds, right? So they're blocking sunlight, and they're like out-competing weeds. They can suppress some different diseases and pests, like some different like root-eating nematodes. They can have so they can break some disease cycles. They can increase the infiltration of water. So all of the roots that we're going to be leaving in the ground from the cover crop, when they die, you can imagine all those root spaces then become place for water infiltration, air infiltration to happen. So that can be, and those roots can also reduce erosion, and the above ground plants can help reduce erosion both from water and from wind. And we can help decrease soil compaction with utilizing cover crops, just again, those roots. And we'll talk more about that when we get into specifics. And they can attract a lot of beneficial insects, both pollinators and a lot of the other guys that really help us out. And anything from ground beetles to parasitic wasps, they're going to be providing habitat. And they can also decrease nutrient loss. They can scavenge different nutrients and hold on to them. They can increase soil aggregation. Y'all remember soil aggregates, that term, when your garden soil, it has that crumbly texture, so those are aggregates, and healthy soil has aggregate stability. So it's not dust, right? If we throw it up in the air, it doesn't just like all come apart and fly away. It has this stability to it, and those aggregates, and those are all created by the microbiology, by the life of the soil, creating these glues that holds the different sand, silt, and clay particles together so that we have soil and not just dust or dirt. So they can help with that. And that's what, when we talk about tilth, the tilth of the soil, that is a term that is describing that aggregate structure of the soil. So it can add organic matter. Organic matter is the food of the whole soil food web, and it can enhance mycorrhizal numbers. So that's the fungi of the soil that's in relationship to the plants. And it can add nitrogen, which gardeners, we love nitrogen, right? The plants love nitrogen, we need it, and cover crops can help with that. So there's a lot of different cover crops. And for today, we're going to work with two basic categories, legumes and non-legumes. So legumes are, what are they? They're like clovers, peas, beans, vetches, sweet clover, and they have a superpower. And what's the superpower? Nitrogen fixing, right? So they fix nitrogen, which is kind of amazing. So, there's nitrogen in the air everywhere, but it's not available to plants. So it needs to be mineralized into a plant available form, ammonia, and the legumes can do that. And it's really cool. So if you dig up a legume, you'll find these little nodules on the roots. And those are, so inside there, the legumes have this relationship with rhizobium, with this bacteria. And in there, they create this little microclimate that is a low oxygen environment, which is what's needed to fix the nitrogen. But the bacteria actually still need oxygen for their respiration. So what's very cool is if you take this little nodule and split it open, it will, if it's fixing nitrogen, it will be pink. And so you can go into your garden, you can rip up your clover plant, you can find the nodule, you can open it up, and if it's pink, you're like, woohoo, it's fixing nitrogen. And the reason it's pink is that just like in our blood, oxygen is moved around by hemoglobin, right, which is iron-based. That's why our blood is red. And so the plants have a leg hemoglobin, which is also iron-based. And that is how they get the oxygen to the bacteria that the bacteria needs, while keeping the inside of the nodule low oxygen, so the bacteria can do what it needs to do with fixing the nitrogen. Pretty cool, huh? They got this figured out. So, and then the plant also is like, wow, thank you, rhizobium. We love nitrogen. Here, have some cookies, have some carbohydrates. So that's going on in there. Now, legumes have this ability to collaborate, and they will when they need nitrogen. So if you plant a cover crop of your clover or whatever in your garden, and you're also like, oh, I love nitrogen, and you're heavily fertilizing with nitrogen, legumes will not fix nitrogen if they don't need to, because they want to hang on to their cookies. So If we are planting cover crops to provide nitrogen for our garden, and we're over fertilizing, we're not, the cover crops aren't going to, they're not going to fix nitrogen unless they need to. So, if you dig up your clover and you open up your little nodule and it's gray, it's not pink at all. It's probably well, it's not fixing nitrogen if it's not pink. And it's probably, just, there's enough nitrogen there that it doesn't need to. So if you ever do that, hold on, and so if you do a soil test, you know, it might be interesting to look at, you know, how much nitrogen that you have in your soil. And so that is the superpower of the legumes. And so on here we have, starting on the left, oats, hairy vetch, and clover. So we're going to be, as we talk today, thinking a lot about roots, because it's so often, you know, it's like we relate to the above ground part of the plant so easily, but just knowing that all of these are building biomass under the soil as well. So, and that's how they help with compaction and different things like that. So here's just a little, they're so beautiful too. So we've got white clover, we've got some peas, I guess, can you kind of see that little pointer? Peas with oats there, we've got purple vetch, crimson clover, and then down at the bottom, fava beans. Fava beans are kind of cool because they're also yummy. They're a nice, and they go all winter, so it can be a nice little winter green. You can make pesto out of them. I like growing them as a cover crop, and then I've kind of turned it into a crop. So I'm not sure what they count as at this point. So legumes have additional benefits. Pollinators love them once they're in flower. They can reduce erosion. They produce a lot of biomass, and yeah, and pollinators and other beneficials. So yay, legumes. And then we have the category non-legume, which they also have superpowers, but I couldn't find like a cool Ruby little picture like I could for the legumes. So with the non-legumes, there's the cereals, rye, oats, barley, triticale, that kind of thing. There's some grasses, and then there's buckwheat, and then there's brassicas. So we're going to kind of go through those. So the cereals are, cereal rye is probably the most common cover crop used across the US in agricultural systems. It's like a workhorse. And in the garden setting, probably cereal rye or oats will be the kind of most common ones that you'll come across or use. So these guys, like, look at that root structure, huh? Lots of roots down there. So they are really good at creating a lot of biomass to build soil organic matter. And they're really good at weed suppression and the nutrient accumulation. So at the end of your growing season, when you're putting your garden to sleep, or putting on your little cover crop blanket instead of your mulch blanket, like, so there's usually there's nitrogen, there's various nutrients that are in your soil. So those are all water soluble. Well, not all, but a lot of them are water soluble. So if you just leave it uncovered bare for the winter, or even if you just have mulch on it, those nutrients are going to, you know, be washed away with the precipitation over the winter. So one of the things that we can do when we put in a cover crop, and cereals and the radishes that we'll get to are really good at this, they will scavenge those nutrients. They will be like, okay, we're going to pick up all the nitrogen that's around here and we're going to store it in our own bodies. So then instead of losing that nitrogen, you're keeping it in your system. in the cover crop. So the cover crop is acting as kind of storage for your nutrients. So then when you incorporate it into the soil in the spring, you still have it instead of it being, who knows where, where do they go? So, and then they can also be really good with compaction. You can look at that root system. They can just, those roots can work down into the soil and create different pathways down through hard pan. So I just wanted to share this. So we actually put the photo on the left, like we had a pretty intense winter last winter, right? Yeah, that cold. So we put in cover crop on these 2 acres where we planted triticale, which is a cross between wheat and rye. And then we ran out of seeds, so we put some rye in there too. And then we also had fava beans in there. It was just gorgeous. And then we had that cold winter killed all the favas. I was like, oh. And then on the left, the triticale, it did survive, but it was knocked back. And then on the right is the rye. So that's where it's like, rye is tough. And that was a really, just kind of stark, like, rye was like, I'm still green and going, and triticale was like, oh gosh. So, and then the picture on the right, I don't know if you can see, it's snowing, it's like, it was in the heart of winter, and now it was, you can see it's not that pretty, but it's like a lot of like rye kind of cover crop in there, kind of holding the soil in the garden over the winter. So then we have brassicas, and we're going to talk first about tillage radish. So look at those roots, huh? Check that out. Do you think that's good for breaking up compaction? Yeah, wow. And what's cool about these is, you know, when you terminate it, that root, that whole big white crazy root down there into the soil is going to die in there and just create this like big, huge pore space down into the soil. So tillage radish can be great for compaction. And then the middle picture here is just, I can't remember now if I actually did that on purpose, but it was a really lovely cover crop of kale, and it has a bunch of other stuff in it too. But so I don't know, if you like save your kale seeds, then you like always save like, you know, 20 times more than you would ever use, and you can just like throw it out there and it could be a cover crop. You know, their kales are hardy and they'll hold that soil over the winter and you can eat it. So mustards are kind of cool. They can be used as a biofumigant. So having a mustard cover crop, and then you have to till it in. There's some real specifics about it, and it can help with some different pathogens in the garden, some different like root-eating nematodes. Some people say it can help with wireworms, other people say it's like, yeah, maybe not. So I don't know. I haven't done a whole lot of experimenting with this, but if you're curious, there's rabbit holes you can go down, and there's a lot to learn about it. And so mustards can definitely, yeah, they can be used in that way. Okay, so now buckwheat. So now everything that we've talked about until now has been more of a cool season crop. So now our buckwheat is more of a warm season. So it can be a cover crop for the summer, and it's fast growing. It's really good at weed suppression. It grows fast, puts out leaves, and is going to just smother out weeds. It's really easy to terminate. And pollinators love it. The flowers, like a bed of buckwheat and flowers, just lovely. And there are a whole lot of different warm season crop things that you can use for cover crops. Lacy Phacelia, the purple over here is like, I mean, it's also called bees friends or something like that. And so it is, all of these are wonderful pollinator attractors that can be used like on their own or interplanted in some different ways. So um, it's really helpful to have these kinds of things going on in your garden. So we had our two categories, non-legume, legume, and then we have our warm season, cool season. So between these four categories, we can kind of think about how we would maybe put things together or what we would use when. So, and I'll share this slide so you can look at it later. And so we can use cover crops individually, like a bed of fava beans or crimson clover, or we can mix it up. We can put them together. So often a strategy can be a cereal and a legume. So the legume will be fixing nitrogen, the cereal will be providing a lot of biomass and provide structure for that legume to grow up, like oats and peas, rye, vetch, something like that. Really nice. And I think these kinds of combinations are great, like, okay, I just want to get started and do like play with cover crops, start here. And then you can really go wild and you can like mix a lot of different things together, just as long as you're, you know, either in the cool season or the warm season. Don't make those. And people are experimenting with, you know, doing like 16 different things in a cover crop mix, and just know if you start playing around with that, that depending on the year, the season, like, you know, how much rain we get, how much different things will express in different ways, different years, depending on the conditions. And so, yeah, so you can really play around with it if you want to. So one thing about nitrogen, in the legumes, it's in the above ground portion of the plant is where most of the nitrogen of that plant is stored. So when we bring it down into the ground, so it's not just in the roots, it's up in the above ground portion. So in general, plants are going to have more nitrogen in them when they're in that soft vegetative part of their growth stage, up until like the beginning of flowering. Once they get into full flower, or definitely once they get into seed production, the plant is going to become more carbonaceous, more of that nitrogen goes into the seed, and so it's not going to be as much of a nitrogen source for your soil as it is when it's in that vegetative growth. So if you're mixing things, this is another reason why having a legume and a non-legume together can be good, is that you're going to still be in the kind of positive as far as amount of nitrogen in your cover crop. If it's just a non-legume cover crop, you can, when you terminate it, it may not have enough nitrogen in its plant kind of biomass to, so it can lock up nitrogen in the soil while it's being kind of digested by the soil. So just wanted to talk a little bit about that. So planting, how do we plant them? The easiest thing, especially on a small scale, is just to broadcast. So you can do that by hand, or if you have one of those crank seeders, or just broadcasting the seed. And then we do want to make sure that we have seed to soil contact. So raking it in or doing something to kind of press it in. And like with any seed, it's going to need moisture. So this time of year, like getting fall cover crops in, timing it before it's supposed to rain is the easiest way to do it. But it can be sometimes a little challenging in the summer, like if you're wanting to do like some buckwheat in, July or something, it's like, you're gonna need to irrigate, to get it going. And a lot of them, the summer ones, once they're kind of established, they can be fine, but they do need some water to get established. And then, just like with other seeds, the general rule of seed size determines depth. So, the little teeny like clover seeds, just need to be, they need that seed to soil contact, but if it's a bigger like fava bean seed, it's gonna wanna get down there a little bit deeper. So, these tables are in the links that in the slide, so you can find them at home. And, when we think about planting, they're planting windows. So we're in the fall right now. This is like, we're all like going, oh, it's getting time to put our garden to bed. And what does that look like? Cover crops can be one of the ways that one of the strategies for putting our garden to bed. So between now, I think about right around the fall equinox is a great time to get your cover crop seeds in. And then we have wiggle room into October, and especially for things like the cereal rye, favas, some of the clovers. And I've planted, like, I think into like, I don't know, end of October with fava beans, and then like, ooh, wow, they did it. So, but to get a nice stand, because it's like when we get to the end of October is when we get to that time where we just start having like 10 hours of daylight, and we go into that Persephone time in the winter where it's like plants just don't have enough light to really grow. So you want to get them established, germinated, established. So then a lot of them will just sit there during that Persephone period. And then when we come to beginning of February and Candlemas and the light starts coming back, then they'll start growing. But they're still doing their work when they're just sitting there and holding the soil and keeping it covered and feeding the soil microbial communities and doing their work. So you can, and then they also have charts for planting times during the summer for the different summer cover crops. So with all of this, the most important thing is, how do we kill it? So we want it to plant it, we want it to grow, and then we want it to die. So there are some strategies. And just know too that the residue management, so we're trying to build biomass to get into our soil, and so there can be a lot of plant matter, and it's like, oh my gosh, what do we do with this? So yeah, as far as like how do we terminate it, depending on what it is, the time of year. So in that early spring, so if we've got our cover crop that's grown over the winter, and then in the spring, we're gonna wanna plant our spring crops, but oh my gosh, what are we gonna do? So you need to like think ahead a little bit, depending on how you're going to terminate it, because it needs to be terminated and then some time to incorporate in, and then you will plant whatever it is that you're wanting to plant for the spring season. So, and then it also depends on how are you going to be planting? Are you going to be transplanting, using transplants, or are you going to be direct seeding? So, transplants, you can transplant into beds that are a little messier, have a little bit more crop residue on the surface is actually great. That's like mulch for the next season. If you're direct seeding, want to have a little bit more access to the soil. And And then also like, what tools do you have available? Because there are different strategies. So, most of the strategies involve cutting it somehow. So whether it's a lawnmower, a weed whacker, a scythe, if you just, and you know, if you have a small raised bed, clippers, just like getting that cover crop cut is the first step. We have a little bit, I like the scythe, Claire likes the weed whacker, so I don't know, we use both, we've tried the lawnmower, it's like, it's not ideal in our garden. So if you cut it, then we're also going to have to do another step to really kill it that we'll get to. So you can also till it in, so the rototiller, and depending on how tall it is, sometimes cutting it first is helpful, but so tilling it in is a good strategy. And then there's also and with tilling it, there are some benefits and some drawbacks. So what the benefit is, it's going to get that biomass incorporated into the soil where it's going to have contact with the microbes. The microbes are going to, I mean, they can just double their population like that. So within a week, it will just like, the like amount of soil microbes will just explode and eat and just like gobble up that, that biomass and get it incorporated. So that can be one strategy that can be great. And I did it for years. We would have a cover crop, we'd do one pass with the tiller, and then I'd be good to go for the rest of the season. So the drawbacks are with the tillage, it's like we break that like disturb the soil as little as possible principle. And so you are also breaking up some of that structure, but it can also be a great way to get cover crops in. So depending on your system, you know, we all just make our choices of what we want to do and why. And the other option is crimping, which the picture down at the bottom with the foot with the board on a board. So crimping is a strategy where the plant is bent over and kind of squished. So, you know, when we cut, especially like a cereal, right? We cut it like we mow our lawn, it keeps growing. Like a lot of things you cut, but it's still going to keep growing. Crimping it, it actually kind of squishes that stem and that can kill it. Doesn't always. So, and I haven't played around with this as much, although I did find this, which is a bicycle roller crimper. So I don't know if anyone has one or sees one. I would love to try it out. So, but since we don't have one, I'm just gonna kind of take you through our process on the farm. So, and this is actually more kind of crop residue than I was like, I don't have good cover crop pictures, so, but it's the same process. So starting on the left here, we have cut down this bed of, I think it was chard and such. We actually did have kind of a unintentional cover crop going on because we had a seed chard crop the year before that dropped a lot of seeds, so we had just chard everywhere. So it was kind of a chard cover crop, which actually chard can be used in cover crop mixes. But so we cut it down, and then the next thing we do is we will kind of sprinkle some compost on the top, just a light sprinkle. It is nice when your husband makes a lot of compost, I know, but so we'll do that. You can also, some systems will sprinkle with just a little bit of garden soil, like if you sometimes like take your paths and put them back onto your, your beds, if your beds kind of slump, that could be a time to do that. So, and you don't have to do that, but it can speed up because we're basically seeding all the microbes onto the biomass that we just put down. And then we'll cover it with a tarp, or this is landscape fabric. And so we cover it, and I keep the irrigation on underneath. So if you're doing this in the summer, it needs to have enough moisture because the soil microbes, they live in the water films on the particles. And if it's dry, it's just going to desiccate. It's not going to break down. So then we cover it, and depending on the season, in the early spring, we'll cover it for like 6 weeks because everything's sluggish and hasn't woken up yet. In the summer, it can be 2 weeks. We put the tarp on and then we pull it back. And we do a lot of transplanting, most of our stuff. So there will often be, like, if there were bigger stems or stuff, some residue there on the surface, which is great. We're like, woohoo, we got some mulch there. So we just plant right into it. If we were wanting to direct seed and wanted a kind of a cleaner seed bed, can just rake those pieces off and then direct seed into it. So that's our process. And here you can see this was a bed that I remember, I think had favas on, and then had been tarped, and then that's what it looked like afterwards. I mean, it's amazing. It's like there's all this biomass, and then you like have it undercover for a while and you pull it up, and then it's like it's gone. And it's gone because the soil microbes, the earthworms, everything's like, well, taking it down into the soil. It's very cool. So I said in the spring, residue is slower to break down. And so, yeah, we plan to tarp for like 6 weeks in the spring. So, you know, you got to think ahead a little bit. And then summer, yeah, 2 weeks, and you want to think about moisture. So there's some other strategies, like right now, okay, yes, we want to cover crop in, but we have, you know, fall kale. We have things that are going to be in the ground for a while, way beyond our seeding window. So you can seed things, interseed cover crops with existing plants. So here is, you know, a white clover that's coming in underneath chard. So as the chard winter kills, or, you know, that clover is going to be there. So this is a great strategy. Crimson clover under brassicas that are going into the fall. On the right is alyssum underneath a zucchinis. So which grew up, helps with weed suppression, and then it's also attracting pollinators. So because we want to make sure our summer squash is well pollinated, so it can have that dual purpose. And then in the center is we think about the ends of the rows and like these weird little corners that happen in the garden as a place where we can have like pockets of diversity, or and so this is actually the end of a corn row, and there's marigolds, which I didn't mention, that is something that could be used in the summer, and white clover. So here's a picture of, you know, kind of along the central path in the market garden, there's like all these different like little end bits that are providing habitat for our beneficial insects and pollinators, and I think about soil microbes too, just like there's, oh, and then we have all of our friends, right? Isn't it so cool that we don't have to garden alone? We're like, we have so many friends that help us. So we have all the pollinators, and we have the parasitic wasps, and the ground beetles, and the lady beetles that come in and eat our different garden pests. We have our little tree frogs that come in and help, and snakes, and the birds, and and we also have some things that are, you know, not helpful, but we have a lot of helpful ones. So, and all that diversity that's above ground, we also need to keep thinking about our roots and our soil and our below ground. So there's just as much diversity helping us out below ground, and actually much more, because what did we say? It was in 1 teaspoon of soil, it was 1 billion microbes and up to 10,000 different species. So there's a lot of diversity, and that's not, and then there's earthworms and all the little springtails and all the little arthropods and those critters who are helping us out. So, so there's a lot of benefits that can come from utilizing cover crops. There's also a lot of, it does take some thought, like thinking ahead and like, what do I need to do to be ready to put my crop in when I want to put it in? And I think it's something that you can like play with, like, ooh, what if I threw that in my cover crop, or, have fun with it. And it can be beautiful, like some of the, just looking out over a winter garden with this like beautiful stand of fava beans, and then it gets cold and then they go, but then they bounce back. It's like, it can just like bring kind of that garden into the whole season, and that it's being fed all year. And so I would just encourage everyone to try it, play with it. And we're always learning, like I'm always learning about cover crops. So I'd love to hear what you learned. And there are a ton of resources out there. This is just like the tip of the iceberg, or like, I don't know, snowflake on the top of the iceberg. So, yeah, Johnny's has some great materials. Sarah has this managing cover crops profitably it has a lot of information. Some of it's much more kind of agriculture scale, but it has those kind of charts that I showed there. You can find a bunch of different charts like that. So when you're like, okay, I have a compaction problem, I really want to work with that, you can like go, okay, what are the different things that really work with compaction? Or so if you want to geek out, you can. And these 2 fact sheets from WSU are great. They're for west of the Cascades. They're simple, clear, like, I think those 2 are awesome. And then as far as seed sources, so I went by Sunset. They have a very limited amount of cover crop seed, but there is some there. And there are 2 like kind of jar things. One's summer, don't buy that right now. One's winter, so it's a nice little mix. So there is some at Sunset. Deer Creek Seeds is a great resource because they have free shipping on their smaller amounts. And that's like, I think it's under 20 pounds. But you can get a mix of stuff there. And all of these, they will all have mixes too. So you can get your individual, like, pound of crimson clover seed, or a lot of different places will have mixes too. So, and green cover is it has a cool tool where you can kind of put in I want a nitrogen fixer and a this and a that, and then it will like go, here's a mix for you. And then if you want to get larger amounts in the area, the Conway Skagit Agronomy is probably the best kind of regional local resource for, if you're wanting to do a bigger amount, or if you guys want to like, let's go get 50 pounds of rye and divvy it up, that would probably be the place to go. So I just want to leave this with this, because I think that actually I'm not opposed to farming naked at all, but I think that we should plant cover crops. And so with that, I don't know if there's any questions. I'm happy to take questions, and thank you so much. And
Thank you so much. That was amazing. Looks like Nancy.
I just have a very small vegetable garden and I planted mustard and, what's the one that no one likes in their tacos?
Cilantro?
Cilantro.
Uh-huh.
And a few other things like that, and they all just wild and crazy. I couldn't use any of them. And I just pulled them all out the other day, thinking, well, this was a failure. So should I have just left those there? That sounds like they could have been winter cover crops.
Yeah, they could have been, and, well, to get the benefit, there's that, like, I mean, just having a living root in the soil over the winter, even if it goes past that vegetative state and is like more seedy or whatever, I think it's beneficial just to have that soil, like having a living root in there is going to be feeding the microbes, even if you're not going to like incorporate the biomass. So yeah, so we actually will do that. We were just discussing that on a bed yesterday of like, oh, there's all this cilantro that's gone, and it's like, okay, we'll just leave it, but we'll just like maybe interplant some clover with it. So you can do that too, if there's stuff that's like, well, it can just stay or
Be happy.
yeah.
And then in a small garden like I have, it, after looking at this, it kind of looks like the legumes would be easier to work with, right?
Mhm. Yeah, crimson clover is maybe like, it's actually pretty easy to kill, to pollinate. So, yeah, I think crimson clover can be just a great, if you're just like, what should I do? Just put some crimson clover in.
Okay,
It's pretty easy to terminate in the spring. Yeah,
okay, thank you.
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So after you plant it in the fall and it's established a little bit, do we need to mulch on top of that?
I didn't think about that, did I? I usually, if you want to mulch as well, and sometimes we will do that, we just put a light mulch layer on it. We'll usually seed and then put a light mulch layer on top of it and let it grow through the mulch is the strategy that.
And in that case, if it's a legume and you've added a mulch, like a compost with nitrogen, then it's not gonna fixate, it won't get those great nodules.
It will be, well, it depends, and I guess often with mulching in the winter, I would use straw or maybe a more kind of carbonaceous, I mean, it depends, you can also use compost, you would just use, the nodules will, it's not gonna have enough nitrogen from a compost application into the spring. So you are going to get nodules and then the legumes will fix some nitrogen, yeah.
Do the root nodules ever turn gray because the plant has fixed as much nitrogen as is needed and then it stops, or does it only turn gray because the nitrogen's come from some other source?
It will turn gray when the plant is not feeding the rhizobium. So if the plant determines for whatever reason it doesn't need nitrogen from the rhizobium, it won't feed it, and then it will not be. So
But is that far-fetched that would ever happen?
well, I mean, it could, if there wasn't enough, unless, like, if you fertilized and put more nitrogen on, then it might turn off. But when the legume is fixing the nitrogen, it's fixing it for itself. So, and that's why we will incorporate we're not going to get the nitrogen from the legume unless we incorporate the plant into our soil one way or another. So just the roots, it's not fixing nitrogen and then sending the nitrogen out to other plants. It's fixing it and storing it in its own body. And then to make that available for other plants, we need to kill it, and it needs to be incorporated into the soil.
And actually, I have one other question. What is the difficulty of terminating vetch?
Oh, that can be tricky, yeah. So that's where a lot of, like, we cut it and then either, either cut it and then either till it or tarp it for, and it's going to be easier when it's vegetative and it's just coming into flower. If any of those, if you let them go into seed, it's going to be harder. And you're not going to get the same effect because the plant is going to be more carbon. It's going to be more of a carbon base than when it's more vegetative and succulent.
Thank you for that great talk. So I have two questions about legumes. So sometimes I've planted legumes and had them not develop nodules at all. Now, is that because they're in a nitrogen-rich environment already? And then can you comment on the use of inoculants when that would be
Right.
appropriate?
Yeah, okay, thank you. So from my reading, and I mean, this whole part is just from reading, so that was my understanding, is that legumes will only form the nodules when there's not enough nitrogen in the soil already. So that's what I understand at this point. And then inoculants, right? So that rhizobium, and there are different varieties that have relationships with different legumes. So you will often see, sometimes seed will be pre-inoculated, which means it has that bacteria kind of on the seed. So, and then you can also buy the seed and the inoculant separately, and so you'll want to do that when you seed. So you get the seed and the inoculant, you mix them together, and then you do your seed. So that can be really a good idea and a good practice to do. And yeah, so inoculants are good for legumes.
I think you had a question about what would you recommend for primarily a bulb bed and mostly for weed suppression. So these are bulbs that will come out in the late spring.
In the late spring, that's it. Yeah, because it comes up early, and so it's weed suppression early, or, yeah, no, I mean, you could put something in that winter kills, like maybe favas or something else that winter kills, so then it's clear in the spring, and then after they're kind of done with their flowers, or you could like plant buckwheat or something in the bed that will then come up and kind of protect it from weeds over the summer. Then you'd have like flowers and more flowers. I don't know.
Anyone else have ideas? How they do? Anybody else? Thank you so much.
Thank you.